The quiet wind flew through the darkness of space, and Yura sat in the pilot's seat, watching the stars blur past and trying to remember how the breath of Terran was asleep in the back, and his body was exhausted from months of captivity and fear, and his glow pulsed weakly. Even in Resh, she had saved him. Nadoyan had saved him, and now Do-Yun was gone. She had watched the facility shrink on the sensors until it was nothing but a dot of light among millions of others, and she had waited for something to happen, and she had prayed to gods she was not sure she believed in any more. Hours passed. The Terran woke once and asked where they were going, and she told him they were going somewhere safe, and he accepted this because he was 12 and he trusted her, and she was all he had left. She did not tell him about the human who had given everything for them. She could not find the words. The sensors beeped. Yura looked at the screen, and at first she did not understand what she was seeing because it made no sense, and it could not be real. A small signal moving away from the facility at high speed. An emergency pod. Her hand shook as she changed course, and the ship responded smoothly, and she flew toward the signal with hope burning in her chest like fire. The pod was small and battered, and it tumbled through space without power, and when she brought it aboard, she did not know what she would find. She opened the hatch. Do-Hyun lay inside. His face was bruised and bloody, and his body was limp, and for one terrible moment she thought he was dead. Then he coughed. "You were supposed to keep flying," he said, and his voice was barely a whisper. "You were supposed to die," she said back, and tears streamed down her face. "But you did not, and I'm not leaving you behind." She pulled him out of the pod and half carried him to the medical bay, and Taran appeared and helped without being asked, and together they cleaned his wounds and bandaged his cuts and gave him water and let him rest. He slept for almost a full day. When he woke, Yura was sitting beside him, and her glow was warm and steady, and she was watching his face like she was afraid he might disappear if she looked away. "How did you escape?" she asked. "Found an emergency pod," he said, and his voice was rough. "Launched before their reinforcements arrived, and hoped the autopilot would take me somewhere useful." "It brought you to us. Good autopilot." She laughed then, and it was the first time he had heard her laugh, and it sounded like light breaking through clouds. "Taran wants to meet you," she said, properly this time. She helped him sit up, and a moment later Taran appeared in the doorway, and his glow was brighter than it had been in the facility, and his eyes were clear and curious. "You are the human," Taran said, "the one who came to get me." "I am." Yura said, "You fought all the guards by yourself." "I fought some of them," Do-Hyun said. "I am not sure I would say I won." Taran stepped closer and studied him with the serious expression that only children can manage. "Thank you," he said, "for saving me and for saving my sister and for being kind when you did not have to be." Do-Hyun looked at this small boy who had survived things that would have broken most adults, and he thought about Suman and the years he had lost and the years he still had left. "You are welcome," he said. They returned to the station 3 days later. Word had spread somehow, and when they docked, there were people waiting, and not just curious onlookers, but humans who had heard what had happened and who wanted to know more. A retired soldier named Park Ji-hoon approached Do-Hyun while he was walking from his ship. "I heard you took on the Keth Syndicate alone," Ji-hoon said. "I would not call it taking them on," Do-Hyun said. "I would call it barely surviving." "Either way," Ji-hoon said, "there are others like those two, and Velith and other species being held and sold and treated like property, and some of us have been talking, and we want to do something about it." Do-Hyun looked at him. "What kind of something?" "The kind that needs people who know how to fight, and people who know how to plan, and people who have contacts in low places." "That sounds dangerous. So does rescuing children from trafficking facilities alone," Ji-hoon said. "But you did it anyway." Do-Hyun thought about 6 years of hiding and pretending and trying not to feel, and he thought about how none of it had helped, and how the only thing that had made him feel alive again was helping someone else. "Talk to me later," he said. After I get some sleep. Ji-hoon nodded and walked away, and Do-hyun continued to his shop with Yura and Taran. Beside him in the weeks that followed, things changed. Do-hyun's shop became something more than a repair business, and refugees and escaped slaves found their way there through whispered networks and careful directions, and they found food and shelter and someone who listened. Yura worked beside him, and she translated for those who did not speak common, and she held the hands of those who were afraid, and she showed them that hope was possible even after everything. Taran enrolled in the station's small school, and he made friends, and he began to smile again. And sometimes at night, Yura would hear him laughing, and she would cry because she had not known if she would ever hear that sound again. One evening, she found Do-hyun in the back of the shop, and he was looking at the photograph of Sumin. She would be proud of you, Yura said. I do not know about that. I do, Yura said, because I know what it means to lose everything, and I know what it means to find something worth living for again. And you have given that to so many people. Do-hyun set the photograph down. My people have a saying. Yura continued. We used to say that hope is for those who have power and that the powerless have no right to hope. And now I believe something different, she said. I believe that hope is not for those who have power, but for those who find good people. She looked at him with eyes that held gratitude and respect, and something that might have been love. You are a good person, Kang Do-hyun, and you taught me that kindness exists even in the darkest places. He did not know what to say, so he simply nodded. Outside the shop, the station hummed with its eternal rhythm, and ships came and went, and people lived their lives in the spaces between the stars, and in one small corner of that vast and often cruel galaxy, a human and two Velith had built something fragile and precious. They had built a home. They had built hope, and that hope spread like light from a small fire, and it touched others and warmed others and reminded others that they were not alone. Do-hyun returned to his work, and Yura returned to hers, and Taran ran through the corridors with his new friends, and somewhere far away, someone who had lost everything found their way to a station where a human was known to help strangers. The galaxy did not change overnight, but to change one person at a time, one kindness at a time, one small act of stubborn compassion at a time. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. The ship was called the Quiet Wind, and it had seen better days, but its engines ran true, and its hull was solid, and that was all Do-hyun needed. They traveled for 3 days through space that grew darker and emptier the further they went from civilized systems. Sierra spent most of the journey staring out the viewport at the stars, and Do-hyun let her have her silence because he understood that some things could not be spoken about until they were ready to be spoken on. The second night, she found the photograph. He had not hidden it well, and perhaps part of him had wanted her to find it. Who is she? Yura asked, and she held the image carefully, like it was something precious. Do-hyun looked at the face of his daughter, frozen in time and forever 7 years old, and forever smiling at something just outside the frame. Her name was Sumin, he said. She died 8 years ago during an evacuation, and I was not there to protect her. Yura set the photograph down gently and looked at him with eyes that understood loss in ways most people never would. Is that why you are helping me? Partly because you could not save her. Yes. Yura moved closer to him and sat down beside him in the cockpit. I am sorry, she said, for your daughter and for your pain and for making you remember things you would rather forget. You did not make me remember, Do-hyun said. I never forgot, and I just learned how to carry it without falling down. How? 1 day at a time, and sometimes 1 hour at a time, and sometimes 1 minute at a time. She nodded slowly like she understood. My mother told me something once, she said. She said that grief is the price we pay for love, and that if we never loved, we would never grieve, but we would also never truly live. Your mother was wise. She was, Yura agreed, and her glow dimmed with sadness. And I miss her every day. They sat together in the quiet of the ship and watched the stars drift past, and neither of them spoke again for a long time. On the third day, they reached the Novak system. The Keth processing facility was disguised as a mining operation on a barren moon, and from a distance it looked like nothing more than industrial buildings and landing pads and machinery. But Do-yoon knew what lay beneath the surface. "How do we get in?" Yura asked. Carefully, Do-yoon said. He had spent the journey studying the facility's layout and security systems, and he had called in more favors than he could count to get the information. He needed the plan was simple, because simple plans had fewer things that could go wrong. He had forged credentials identifying him as a buyer interested in domestic servants, and he had bribed a docking controller to look the other way when his ship did not match any registered vessels. He would go in alone and find Taran and bring him out. "No," Yura said when he explained the plan. "I am coming with you. It is too dangerous. He is my brother, and if something goes wrong, I need you to be on this ship ready to leave." "I will not leave without you. You might have to." She stared at him with fierce determination in her eyes, and her glow burned brighter than he had ever seen it. "You saved my life," she said. "You gave me hope when I had none, and you promised to help me find my brother, and I will not sit here and wait while you risk everything for my family." Do-yoon looked at her and saw the strength that had kept her alive through everything she had survived, and he knew that arguing would be pointless. "Stay close to me," he said, "and if I tell you to run, you run and do not look back." "I understand." They landed at the facility, and Do-yoon's forged credentials held up to inspection, and they were escorted into the building by guards who looked bored and did not pay much attention to the small Velith walking behind the human buyer inside. The facility was clean and bright, and nothing about it suggested the horrors that took place within its walls. They were taken to a viewing area where potential buyers could see the merchandise before the auction, and Do-yoon forced himself to keep his expression neutral as he looked at the cages. Dozens of beings from a dozen different species sat behind barriers, and their eyes were empty, and their bodies were still, and they had learned that hope was something that only brought more pain. Yura's hand found his and gripped it tightly. "There," she whispered. Do-yoon followed her gaze and saw a small Velith boy huddled in the corner of a cage, and his glow was so dim it was almost invisible, and his eyes stared at nothing. "Turn. Wait here," Do-yoon said quietly. "I will speak to the handlers." He approached a Keth guard and made inquiries about purchasing specific individuals before the auction, and money changed hands and doors opened, and soon he was walking with Yura toward the cage where Taran waited. The boy did not look up when they approached. "Taran," Yura said softly, his head lifted slowly, and his eyes focused on her face, and for a moment there was nothing, and then recognition flooded through him. "Yura," he whispered. "I came for you," she said, and tears ran down her face. "I promised I would come, and I am here." The cage door opened, and Taran stumbled forward and fell into his sister's arms, and they held each other, and their glows merged into a single warm light. "We need to go," Do-yoon said. They moved quickly through the corridors, and for a few precious minutes, it seemed like everything would work. Then the alarm started. "Run," Do-yoon said. They ran. Guards appeared in front of them, and Do-yoon used skills he had not used in years to take them down, and Yura pulled Taran along behind her, and they kept moving. The exit was ahead. They were almost there. Then more guards came, and these were not bored, and these were not careless, and they formed a line between Do-yoon and the door. "Take him and go," Do-yoon said. "What?" "The ship has autopilot, and it will take you to safety, and I will find another way out." "No," Yura said. "I will not leave you." Do-yoon turned and looked at her, and his eyes were steady. "I could not save her," he said quietly. "My daughter, and she died because I was not there, and I have carried that weight every day for 8 years. He touched her face gently. "Let me save you, Yura." Understood then, she understood that this was not just about Taran and not just about her, and that this was about a father who had lost everything trying to become whole again. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she took her brother's hand and Do-yoon turned to face the guards, and his hands curled into fists, and he smiled. "Come on then," he said. He fought harder than he had ever fought in his life, and he gave Yura and Taran every second he could buy them. And when he fell knowing that they had made it out. The last thing he heard before darkness took him was the sound of his ship's engines firing, and that was enough. The station had places that did not appear on any official map, and people who knew things that were not meant to be known. Do-hoon had spent 6 years pretending these places and people did not exist, but now he walked through the lower corridors with purpose in his step and old memories rising in his mind like ghosts he had tried to bury. He found the door he was looking for in a section of the station where the lights had been broken for so long that no one bothered to fix them anymore. He knocked 3 times and waited. The door opened and a woman looked out at him with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Do-yoon," she said, and there was surprise in her voice. "I thought you were done with this life." "I was," he said. "I need your help, Minseo." Jiu. Minseo had been one of the best intelligence officers in the human fleet before she decided that selling information was more profitable than gathering it for people who never said, "Thank you." She stepped aside and let him enter, and the room beyond was filled with screens and equipment that hummed with quiet power. "This is about the Velith," she said, and it was not a question. "How did you know?" "I know everything that happens on this station," she said. "That is what I do, and a human taking in. A stray alien is the kind of thing people talk about." "She is not a stray." Minseo agreed, and she sat down in front of her screens. "She is something much more dangerous than that, and you know it. I need to find her brother." Minseo turned to look at him, and there was something in her expression that might have been concern. "Do you know who took them? Slavers from a raid on Vareth 7. The Keth Syndicate?" Minseo said, and her voice was flat. "They run most of the trafficking operations in this sector, and they are not the kind of people you want to notice you." "I am not asking for your opinion," Do-hoon said. "I am asking for information." Minseo was quiet for a moment, and then she sighed and turned back to her screens, and her fingers moved across the controls with practiced speed. "The Velith colonies were hit hard about 3 months ago," she said. "Standard operation for the Keth, and they take the young and the healthy and anyone who looks like they might be useful, and they dispose of the rest." "Where do they take them?" "Processing facilities," Minseo said. "They have several scattered across the outer systems, and they hold the merchandise there until auction day." Do-hoon felt his jaw tighten at the word merchandise. "Can you find out which facility is holding a young Velith male named Taran? That will cost you. Name your price." Minseo looked at him again, and this time there was something else in her eyes, and something that looked almost like sadness. "I heard about what happened to you," she said quietly, "during the Frontier Wars and the evacuation of Colony 9. Do-yoon did not respond. "Your daughter," Minseo continued. "She was on one of the transports that did not make it out. That has nothing to do with this." "It has everything to do with this," Minseo said. "You left the service after that, and you came here, and you have spent 6 years hiding from everything and everyone, and now suddenly you want to pick a fight with one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in known space." She stood up and walked over to him and looked up into his face. Why, Do-yoon thought about Yura and the way she had looked at him when he offered her water, and the way she had cried against his shoulder when he promised to help find her brother. He thought about his daughter and the message he had received telling him that her transport had been destroyed and that there were no survivors, and the way his whole world had collapsed into a single point of unbearable pain. He thought about all the years he had spent trying not to feel anything because feeling things meant remembering, and remembering meant hurting. Because I could not save her, he said, and his voice was rough. And I have to live with that every day for the rest of my life, but maybe I can save him. Minseo was quiet for a long moment. The information is free, she finally said. Consider it a favor from an old friend. She returned to her screens and worked in silence for several minutes, and then she pulled up a file and turned the screen so he could see it. Tarn of Vareth 7, she said. 12 cycles old and currently being held at a Keth processing facility in the Novak system. An auction is scheduled for 5 days. From now, Do-hyun memorized the coordinates. Thank you, he said. Do-hyun, Nzeo said as he turned to leave. Be careful, and these people will kill you without hesitation if they catch you. I know, and take backup if you can find any. I work alone, Minseo shook her head, but she did not argue, and she watched him go with worried eyes. Do-hyun returned to his shop and found Yura waiting for him, and her glow brightened when she saw him, and he realized that she had been afraid he would not come back. I found him, he said. Her hands flew to her mouth and her eyes filled with tears. Tarn is alive, she whispered. Yes, and I know where he is being held, and we have 5 days to get there. She repeated. I have a ship, Do-hyun said. It is old and not much to look at, but it flies, and it will get us there. You are taking me with you. He is your brother, and he will need to see a familiar face when we find him. Yura moved toward him, and then stopped herself like she was still not sure if touching him was allowed. Why are you doing this? She asked, and it was the same question she had asked before, but this time there was something different in it. Do-hyun thought about telling her the truth, and about his daughter, and his guilt, and all the reasons. That had nothing to do with kindness, and everything to do with trying to fill a hole that could never be filled. But he did not, because it is the right thing to do, he said instead, and maybe that was true too. They spent the next day preparing, and Do-hyun pulled his ship out of storage and checked the engines and made sure everything was working, and Yura helped where she could and watched where she could not. She asked him questions about human customs and human families and human ways of caring for each other, and he answered as best he could. On my world, she told him, families protect each other because survival requires cooperation, and alone we are too small and too fragile to survive. It is not so different for humans, Do-hyun said. But you help strangers? Yura said. You help people who are not your family and who cannot help you in return, and that is something my people do not understand. Some humans would say that everyone is family, Do-hyun said, that we are all connected in ways we cannot always see, and that helping one person helps everyone. Do you believe that? Do-hyun thought about it. I believe that cruelty spreads, he said, and I believe that kindness spreads too, and I would rather add kindness to the galaxy than cruelty. Yura was quiet for a long time after that. That night she came to him with something in her hands, and it was a small crystal that glowed with the same soft light as her skin. This belonged to my mother, she said. She gave it to me before she hid us, and she told me to keep it safe and to remember her. It is beautiful. I want you to have it. Do-hyun shook his head. Keep it, he said. Give it to Toren when we find him, and tell him your mother's love survived everything that happened. And so did you. Yura looked at him with wonder in her eyes. You are not like the stories said, she whispered. The violent ones who take and destroy and care for nothing but themselves. No, Do-hyun agreed. I am just a man who fixes broken things. He paused and then added, and sometimes broken things include people. 2 days passed and Yura remained in the shop. Do-hyun did not ask her to leave, and she did not offer to go. And so they existed in a strange and careful arrangement where neither one pushed too hard against the boundaries. They had silently agreed. Upon he gave her food, and she ate it slowly like she was afraid it might disappear if she moved too fast. He showed her where the washing facilities were, and she used them when he was not around because she still flinched whenever he came too close. He gave her space and time, and asked nothing in return, and this seemed to confuse her more than anything else he could have done on. The second morning, she emerged from the back room where she had been sleeping, and her bioluminescent skin glowed brighter than before, and the color had shifted from pale blue to something warmer, like the first light of a distant sun. "You look better," Da-hyun said without looking up from the engine component he was repairing. "I feel better," she admitted, and there was surprise in her voice, like she had not expected such a thing to be possible. She watched him work for a while, and he let her watch, and did not comment on her presence or try to make conversation because he sensed that silence was easier for her than words. Eventually, she spoke. "You fix things. That is what the sign outside says. Engines and machines and broken equipment." "Yes." She was quiet again, and then she said, "Among my people, the ones who fix things are considered valuable and valuable. Things are protected. And what about the ones who are not considered valuable?" Her glow dimmed slightly, and she did not answer, and Do-yoon wished he had not asked the question. "I am sorry," he said. "You do not have to tell me anything you do not want to tell me." "No," she said, and her voice was stronger, now like she had made a decision. "I want you to understand." She sat down on a crate near his workbench and pulled her knees up to her chest and wrapped her thin arms around them. "My colony was on a moon called Mareth 7. She began. It was small and poor and far from any trade routes, and we thought that it meant we were safe, because who would bother with a place that had nothing worth taking? Do-yoon set down his tools and gave her his full attention. "We were wrong." She told him about the ships that came in the night, and the soldiers who wore no uniforms and carried weapons that burned through doors and walls like they were made of paper. She told him about the screaming and the running, and the way her mother had pushed her and her younger brother into a hidden compartment beneath their home and told them not to make a sound no matter what they heard. She told him about the silence that came after, and the days they spent in that dark space waiting for someone to come and find them and tell them it was safe. No one came. When they finally emerged, their colony was empty, and their mother was gone, and they were alone. "We tried to survive," Yura said, and her voice cracked, but she kept speaking. "We hid and we scavenged and we stayed quiet and invisible for as long as we could. But eventually, they found us." "Who found you?" "Slavers," she said, and the word came out flat and hollow like she had said it so many times it had lost all meaning. "They said we were property now, and that property does not have names or families or rights, and property does whatever it is told to do." Da-hyun's hands had curled into fists, and he forced himself to relax them because his anger would not help her now. "They separated us," she continued. "My brother Taren was taken to a different ship, and I was put with the others who were considered suitable for domestic service, and we were transported for days or weeks, and I lost track of time." "How did you escape?" "The ship stopped at a station to refuel, and there was a malfunction in the cargo hold where they kept us, and in the confusion I ran and I hid, and I stowed away on another transport, and I kept running until I could not run anymore, and then I found this place." She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. "And I found you." Do-hyun did not know what to say, and so he said nothing and let the silence hold them both. "I heard the others talking," Yura said after a while. "The ones on this station who look at me and whisper when they think I cannot hear them." "What do they say?" "They say that Velith are property in many systems, and that you should be careful having one around, because it might bring trouble." "I am not worried about trouble." "You should be," she said, and there was something urgent in her voice now. "The ones who took us are powerful, and they do not like losing what they consider theirs, and if they learn I am here, they will come. Let them come." She stared at him like he had spoken in a language she did not understand. "You do not mean that." "I do. But why?" And now her voice broke fully and tears ran down her face, and her glow flickered wildly. "Why would you risk anything for me when you do not even know me and I cannot give you anything in return?" Dohyun stood up and walked over to her and knelt down so that he was at her level and looked into her eyes. "Because what happened to you was wrong," he said. "And because someone should have helped you a long time ago, and no one did, and I cannot change the past, but I can do something now." She shook her head, and the tears kept coming. "I need to find my brother," she whispered. "Taran is only 12 cycles old, and he is scared of the dark, and he does not understand why this is happening, and I promised our mother I would protect him, and I failed. Where is he now?" "I do not know exactly, but I heard them say something about a processing facility at an auction, and I think they are going to sell him. Then we will find him." She looked at him like he had offered her something impossible. "They told us," she said, and her voice was barely a whisper now. "They told us that no one would help and that the galaxy does not care about small people." She reached out and touched his hand, and her skin was cool against his. "But you gave me water," she said. "You gave me a blanket and food and a locked door, and you did not ask what I could give you in return. And I do not understand." Dohyun felt something shift inside him, and something that had been locked away for a very long time. "What is your brother's name?" he asked. "Taran," she said. "His name is Taran." "Then we will find Taran," Dohyun said. "And we will bring him home." She broke. Then she fell forward and pressed her face against his shoulder and sobbed, and her whole body shook with the force of it. And Dohyun held her carefully and let her cry, and did not tell her it would be okay, because he did not know if that was true, but he knew one thing: he was going to try, and for the first time in 6 years, that felt like enough. The cargo station sat at the edge of contested space, where few travelers came without reason, and even fewer stayed longer than they had. Takang Dohyun liked it that way. He ran a small repair shop on the station's lower deck where the lights flickered, and the air recyclers hummed with age and neglect, and where people minded their own business, because minding someone else's business often led to trouble. He had lived here for 6 years now, and in that time he had learned the rhythm of the station. Like a heartbeat that never changed and never surprised him, tonight was supposed to be like every other night. He was closing up his shop and putting away his tools and thinking about the meal he would heat up in his small quarters when he heard the sound. It was soft at first, and he almost missed it beneath the constant drone of the station's machinery. But then it came again, and this time he recognized it for what it was: a voice. Someone was crying. Dohyun walked to the front of his shop and opened the heavy door that separated his workspace from the corridor outside, and that was when he saw her. She was small and thin, and crumpled against the wall like something broken and discarded, and her skin glowed with a faint blue light that pulsed weakly like a dying star. Valeth had seen her kind before, but always from a distance and always in the company of others who seemed to own them rather than travel with them. This one was alone. Her clothes were torn and dirty, and her arms were wrapped around herself as if she was trying to hold her own body together. And when she looked up at him, her eyes went wide with terror. "Please," she whispered in broken common, and her voice cracked on the word like thin ice beneath too much. "Wait. Please do not hurt me." Dohyun did not move. He had learned long ago that sudden movements frightened those who had already been frightened too many times, and so he simply stood there and let her see him and let her decide what she wanted to do. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, and he kept his voice low and calm like he was speaking to a wounded animal. She did not believe him. He could see it in the way her body tensed and the way her glow dimmed even further until she was almost invisible against the dark metal of the corridor wall. "I can work," she said, and the words tumbled out of her in a desperate rush. "I can clean, and I can carry things, and I can do whatever you want. Just please, do not send me back." "Send you back? Where?" Dohyun asked, but she did not answer. Instead, her eyes rolled back and her body went limp, and she collapsed fully onto the floor, and the last of her light faded to almost nothing. Stood there for a long moment and looked at her and thought, about all the reasons he should walk back into his shop and close the door and pretend he had never seen her. There were many reasons, good reasons, smart reasons. He ignored all of them. He bent down and lifted her carefully, and she weighed almost nothing. In his arms like a bundle of hollow bones wrapped in cold skin, and he carried her inside and laid her on the cot in the corner where he sometimes slept. When he worked too late to bother going back to his quarters, he found a blanket and covered her with it, and then he filled a cup with water and set it beside her where she would see it when she woke. Then he sat down on the other side of the room and waited. She woke 2 hours later. Her eyes opened slowly, and for a moment she did not seem to know where she was, and then the memory returned, and she sat up so fast that she nearly fell off the cot. Easy, Dahyun said from across the room. You are safe here. She stared at him, and her glow flickered with colors he did not recognize and could not read. Why? She asked. Why what? Why did you bring me inside? Dahyun considered the question and realized he did not have a good answer for it, and so he simply shrugged and said, You were on my doorstep, and it seemed like the thing to do. She shook her head slowly, like his words made no sense to her. You are human, she said. Yes, humans are violent, and they take what they want, and they do not help without expecting something in return. Dahyun felt something twist in his chest at her words, and at the certainty with which she spoke them, like she was reciting facts she had learned through pain. Some humans are like that, he admitted, but not all of us. I have nothing to give you, she said, and her voice trembled now. I have no money and no possessions and nothing of value, and if you are expecting payment, I cannot provide it. I am not expecting anything. Then what do you want, right now? Dahyun said, and he nodded toward the cup beside her. I want you to drink some water, because you look like you have not had any in days. She looked at the cup like it might be a trap, and then slowly and carefully she reached for it and brought it to her lips and drank. She drank all of it in long, desperate gulps, and when it was empty, she held the cup in both hands and stared at it like she had never seen anything so precious. Thank you, she whispered. Dahyun nodded and stood up and took the cup from her and refilled it and gave it back to her and sat down again. What is your name? He asked. She hesitated, and he could see her weighing the risk of telling him against the risk of refusing. Yura, she finally said. I am Dahyun. She nodded but did not speak, and they sat in silence for a while, and the only sounds were the hum of the station and the soft rhythm of her breathing. You can stay here tonight, Dahyun said at last. The door has a lock, and I will give you the code so you can secure it from inside, and no one will bother you. Her glow brightened slightly at his words, and he realized that this was the first sign of hope he had seen in her. Why are you doing this? She asked again, and there was something different in her voice now, and something that sounded almost like wonder. Because you needed help, Dahyun said, and because I was here. She stared at him for a long moment, and her eyes searched his face for something, and he did not know if she found it or not, but eventually she looked away and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Among my people, she said quietly, there is a saying that kindness without payment is either foolishness or a trap. And what do you think this is? She was silent for a long time. I do not know, she finally admitted, but I am too tired to run anymore. And if this is a trap, then at least it is a warm one with water and a blanket. Dahyun almost smiled at that, but he held it back because he sensed that smiling might frighten her in ways he did not understand. Get some sleep, he said. We can talk more in the morning, if you want to. He stood and walked toward the door that led to the corridor and paused with his hand on the frame. The code is 4729, he said. Lock it behind me. And then he left and closed the door and waited in the corridor until he heard the soft beep of the lock engaging. He stood there for a moment longer and looked at the closed door and thought about the fear in her eyes and the certainty in her voice. When she had called his kind violent, he thought about all the things that must have happened to her to make her believe that, and He thought about how tired he was of a galaxy that taught small and fragile things to expect cruelty as the only truth. Then he turned and walked to his quarters and did not sleep for a very long time.